Again, today's session is AI and academic integrity. So really today we're going to be going over kind of what the current state of artificial intelligence is and how that kind of interacts with academia and kind of academic integrity as a whole. We are joined by some of our experts over on the Learning Services team, Dr. Amy Dietzman and Sarah Snyder. So I'll go ahead and pass it on over to them.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Maxine. Welcome, everybody. We're excited to talk about this topic with you. We've done this topic a few times, but every time we do it, we dig a little deeper into AI and we find some new things. And so we hope you'll enjoy today. Spring 2025 Student Success Series is the first. After this one, next month, we'll be doing one on overcoming test anxiety. Writing a research paper is our April topic. And then in May, we'll be talking about preparing a presentation. Today's agenda looks a little bit like this. We're going to help answer a few questions you might have. First, why should you even be concerned with academic integrity and plagiarism? What does academic integrity look like? What does plagiarism look like and how can you avoid it? And how can you even trust your own ideas? A lot of people are afraid that no matter what they write, it must be plagiarized because we don't have any of our own original thoughts, but that's not true. We're going to talk about that a little bit. And then we're going to talk about artificial intelligence. Is there a place for it in academics? So let's get started. Now we're going to kick off with a couple of case studies to explore whether or not certain scenarios count as plagiarism. Sarah is going to join me. Sarah, let's start with Ravi's story.
Okay, so last semester, Ravi took an ecology class and wrote a fantastic paper on biodiversity. This semester, he's in a wildlife biology class and realizes that his previous paper would fit one of this semester's assignments perfectly.
So here's the question. Is it plagiarism for Ravi to turn in the same paper twice?
Take a moment, jot down your answer. We're going to revisit this case study at the end.
All right, next up, let's look at Melanie's story.
Melanie has a paper due on the causes and symptoms of drug abuse for her public health class. While she was researching, she found several discussion boards where doctors were answering questions, and she used their responses, citing internet as her source. Melanie also found a website created by the mother of a recovering addict. That site compiled information meant as a resource for families. Since the source of the information wasn't clear, she cited internet again.
All right, so the question here is, has Melanie plagiarized the information that she found online? Write down your thoughts to this one, and we're going to circle back to it. But before we dive into the do's and the don'ts, it's important that we define a few key terms. Plagiarism is the act of taking someone else's work and passing it off as your own. It can be intentional, but it's often inadvertent or accidental.
Exactly. Many students don't even realize that unintentional plagiarism can have serious consequences. Today, we'll discuss how and why it happens, and most importantly, how we can avoid it.
When you hear academic integrity, you might immediately think, well, that's plagiarism, but it's actually a broader concept.
That's right. Academic integrity is about committing to and demonstrating honest and moral behavior in an academic setting.
Academic integrity is grounded in 6 fundamental values. We're going to dive into each one quickly so that we can really give you an idea of where we're going with this when we start talking about what it is and isn't in a little bit and give you some examples.
Our first value is honesty. In academia, honesty means being truthful, giving credit where credit is due, providing factual evidence, and striving for objectivity while considering all sides and even your own biases. An unethical scholar might say, I created this, it came from me, even if it didn't.
Next, we have trust. Demonstrating trust in an academic setting involves clearly stating expectations promoting transparency and encouraging mutual understanding. This is especially important if you're working, let's say, on a group assignment. When you're working with others, they should be able to trust you and you should be able to trust them. But the unethical scholar will say something like, if my instructor has a problem or wonders where my information came from, they can just ask me. Instead of, my instructor can trust that I included all of my sources.
Moving on to the third value, we have fairness. Fairness in academics means applying rules consistently, engaging with others equitably, keeping an open mind, taking responsibility for your actions. So an unethical scholar might justify breaking a rule by thinking, well, I've followed the rules most of the time, so bending them just this once is not going to hurt anything.
Right. And the fourth value is respect. Respect in academia includes active listening, receiving feedback willingly, valuing the thoughts and ideas of others, showing empathy, seeking open communication, and recognizing the consequences of your words and your actions on others. As a college instructor, I've seen the unethical scholar many times in my own classes when students haven't been respectful to me in emails and they ask me questions like this one. Uh, can't believe I got a B. Did you even read it? Or when they don't like feedback that I've provided to them and they get a little disrespectful. It's okay to disagree with other classmates. It's okay to disagree with your instructors, but you want to make sure that you're respectful in doing so.
Now we come to responsibility. Being responsible means holding yourself accountable, engaging in tough conversations, even when you don't want to, following institutional rules, respecting personal boundaries, and overall modeling good behavior. An unethical scholar might think, well, my instructor won't take the time to check my work, so why should I bother citing everything?
Mhm. All right, we're almost through them. Lastly, we have courage. Courage in academics means standing up for what's right, even when it's uncomfortable or maybe a little risky. It's about defending integrity and being willing to fail if it means that you're staying true to your own principles. In a group project, again, for example, an unethical scholar might go along with plagiarism to avoid rocking the boat. Courage means doing the opposite.
These 6 values are at the heart of academic integrity, and they all connect to plagiarism in some way.
So, we're going to discuss 5 types of plagiarism: deliberate cheating, accidental plagiarism, self plagiarism, mosaic plagiarism, you may have never heard of that one, and AI related plagiarism.
Let's start with deliberate cheating. This is the most obvious form of plagiarism. Copying someone else's assignment or using the internet without citation or buying a paper online or cheating during a test.
While deliberate, these actions are usually pretty clear-cut examples of plagiarism. However, there are other types that aren't always so obvious.
Like accidental plagiarism. This happens when someone unintentionally uses someone else's work without proper acknowledgement. It's often due to forgetfulness or disorganization.
Think about the times when maybe you've read something really good and then you've walked away and you've done something else and you came back later and you forgot where you read that information. And later you just included it in your writing and you forgot to cite it because you forgot where it came from. This is where it happens, accidental plagiarism.
Then there's self-plagiarism. This is when you copy work from one class to another or turn in the same paper twice. While it may not seem harmful since it's still your own work, submitting that same work for multiple classes without permission is still considered dishonest.
That's right. Even though it's your own creation, always check with your instructor before reusing past work. Now, mosaic plagiarism occurs when you copy text and slightly reword or rearrange it to make it seem like you wrote it or even that you paraphrased it. Even though it kind of feels like paraphrasing, this practice still borrows heavily from the original text.
True paraphrasing means using entirely original words and sentence structures while retaining the original idea and then giving credit to the originator of that idea. It feels a little abstract. So can you show us an example, Amy?
Sure. So here's a student's version of a passage alongside the original passage. Notice how certain phrases and sentence structures match closely. For example, in the dark red, you see the phrase stood at the iron door. That shows up in both pieces of work. There are multiple instances here that really copy word for word, and I color coded those to show you how they appear in both places.
Okay, I see. It's almost like the student got stuck in what the original author said and couldn't really think of a different way to write it.
Exactly. This shows how unintentional copying can happen when you stay too close to the source material. In a moment, we're going to discuss some ways that you could avoid this mistake. But first, we're going to turn to AI-related plagiarism. With tools like ChatGPT, so readily available to us, students can be tempted to use AI to write assignments. We need to have integrity in the work we ascribe to our name. So, how do we reconcile that idea with the use of AI?
In our critical thinking and research skills webinar a couple semesters ago, which you can find on the YouTube channel, we talked about some helpful uses for ChatGPT, like finding sources or helping you brainstorm different places to look for information. While AI can assist in research, presenting its output as your own work crosses that line into plagiarism. The key is to use these tools responsibly as aids rather than as shortcuts, so that your use of AI doesn't land you in academic hot water.
Before we get into more uses for AI in research, though, let's look at why we do it in the first place. The purpose of research is to gather sources that help you explore a topic and combine them with your own thoughts to produce a cohesive representation of your knowledge, and also to advance human knowledge in general. Because without research, we have no growth of knowledge as an individual or as a society.
And relying solely on AI generated content undermines this purpose for research, right?
It sure does. If what is being represented in your research findings is AI's understanding of a topic, setting aside the fact that AI really has no understanding of content in the first place, then you are plagiarizing a language predictor. While AI may not produce identical results each time it's asked a particular question, you're still using someone or something's logical construct to produce something that you're passing off as your own. And that is plagiarism. Note here that AI detection tools are popping up all over the place just as fast as AI itself. And so your instructors probably already have some tools that they can use to detect when you've plagiarized with AI.
That's where we start running into problems with integrity. If we are passing off something that is not our own as though it is, we are not acting with integrity. And AI tools come with limitations, don't they, Amy?
They sure do. Let's take a look at 4 limitations of AI, really ChatGPT in particular. First is the knowledge cutoff. As of the preparation of this webinar, the knowledge cutoff of ChatGPT is actually October of 2023. Anything that has happened or been updated on the internet since then is not really a part of ChatGPT's knowledge base. With research, we want the most recent information available to us. So as time goes on, ChatGPT is outdating itself.
Next, we have the potential for inaccuracies and inconsistencies in what ChatGPT produces. You and I could both type in the exact same prompt or question and receive wildly different results, some of which may not even align factually with one another. Because it's only looking at language patterns and not actually doing research or even comprehending what it's producing, everything it produces really needs to be vetted against known sources that are produced by critical thinkers, other researchers. So when you think about that, you could end up spending more time vetting what ChatGPT produces than you would actually doing the legwork yourself.
That is crazy to think of. And our third limitation is the presence of bias. Like with inaccuracy, everything ChatGPT produces needs to be vetted for bias. Again, why not just read the source yourself and write the research yourself at this point?
Totally. Last, remember that while ChatGPT has been programmed to sound like a human in its writing style, it is not, in fact, a human. It's just following a formula, looking for the most reasonable next word, not applying critical thinking. This means also that nuance and syntax can be misinterpreted and lead to false or irrelevant responses. It's possible for it to generate complete nonsense and not even know that it has done so. To avoid that, well, you have to vet it. I'm starting to feel like a broken record here. You have to vet everything ChatGPT gives you.
Okay, so let's explore a few case studies where students used ChatGPT.
That's a great idea. By analyzing these scenarios, we'll clarify how to use AI tools responsibly in your academic journey. Let's go through a few and then we'll come back to them and look at whether they were each plagiarism.
All right, so here's our first scenario. Chris needs to write a research paper on the development of paper money as a medium for trade. Chris feeds the instructor's grading rubric and resource requirements into ChatGPT, and ChatGPT writes a paper. Chris reads the paper in full, he agrees with it, cites ChatGPT in the resource list along with some other sources to meet the requirements of the rubric, and he turns it in.
So in summary, ChatGPT wrote the paper, the student read it and agreed with it, and ChatGPT was cited in the resources. Here's another one. Rory is researching the efficacy of reclamation projects in local public parks. Rory uses ChatGPT to identify some well-known public parks and published research about their reclamation efforts. Then Rory follows up on those suggestions from ChatGPT by discussing them with a librarian and finding the original sources where that research was published. Rory compiles the relevant research into a cohesive paper of original writing, does not cite ChatGPT in the resources list, and turns it in.
Okay, so our snapshot here is that ChatGPT helped the student ID some sources. The student did independent research with those sources, and then ChatGPT was not cited. All right, how about this one? Drew is researching the accuracy of ChatGPT in producing information about different species of animals. Drew asks ChatGPT some questions about frogs and turtles and includes ChatGPT's responses as direct quotes. Using other sources to verify or refute ChatGPT's response, Drew completes the research paper with ChatGPT cited as a source and turns it in.
So the gist of this one is that ChatGPT answered some questions for the student. The student did independent research to verify the answers, and ChatGPT was both directly quoted and cited. Let's look at one more case. Parker is researching the history of political upheaval in African countries. Parker asks ChatGPT some questions as a starting point to figure out what needs to be included in the research. In the process, Parker decides that ChatGPT has it all together. In the final research paper, Parker rephrases the answers that ChatGPT provided, doesn't cite ChatGPT, instead cites some books that were relevant, but that weren't actually used in the research, and turns it in.
So we can boil this one down to say that ChatGPT was used to gain some context, then paraphrased but not cited. Now, which of these four cases were an inappropriate use of ChatGPT for research?
Well, the more clear-cut ones are Chris and Parker. They both passed off as their own writing that which was done by ChatGPT. They committed plagiarism and exhibited a lack of academic integrity.
That's right. But what about Rory and Drew? Rory used ChatGPT as a search engine or a virtual librarian to help find sources needed for a research paper. Drew validated ChatGPT and used direct quotes of what ChatGPT generated in addition to citing it in the source list. In both of these cases, they demonstrated academic integrity, even though they used ChatGPT.
Notice that it's not strictly the use of ChatGPT or even the citing of ChatGPT that makes the difference between plagiarism or not, or between academic integrity and not. It's all about the way it's used and the integrity of the research that's conducted with ChatGPT's help.
So this all has me wondering, Sarah, how does ChatGPT actually work? Could you give us a demo?
Absolutely. So here we have the main interface for ChatGPT. You can enter your prompt, which should clearly state what you're looking for or clearly ask a question that you would like to have answered by ChatGPT. Once you've entered your question or prompt, ChatGPT generates its response. Here you can see it producing a bunch of source ideas. Further questions or prompts in the same chat will help to redirect ChatGPT or help ChatGPT to go deeper on what you're looking for. So here we ask specifically for books. If you are unsatisfied or you'd like more of the same, you can ask ChatGPT to regenerate its response and it'll give you an alternative. So here is giving a new list of books. Up at the top there, you can see where you can toggle back and forth between different responses to the same question, those regenerated responses. So a couple of things to note from our demo. First, it provided some great general tips in that first response on where we can look for the information that we desire.
And I saw that when asked specifically about books, it provided a summary of what we might expect to find in that book. That would be particularly helpful with narrowing down the list to the first sources that we want to look into.
Yes, and we were easily able to regenerate that list to see if additional books might be included, which they were. While some of the sources overlapped between the two versions of the response, many of them were new in that second version.
So this is a great way to refresh your options if you're exhausted from looking for sources that have been previously suggested, or you're just tired of Googling and Googling and Googling. With any of these, a librarian would be an excellent resource for finding the sources ChatGPT helped you identify. We can think of a librarian as someone who's a professional researcher on the behalf of you.
That's right. So we've seen a little here about how AI can help us and a little about how we can abuse it when we're completing our research. This seems like a really new angle to plagiarism, certainly one you and I didn't have access to when we were in school, Amy. Let's get back to that plagiarism concept. Why do students plagiarize?
There are several common reasons, and understanding them can help us address the issue. First, students might plagiarize because they're in a hurry. Feeling rushed can lead us to make bad decisions or careless mistakes. Others might just lack confidence in their abilities, thinking that copying and pasting is really the only way you're going to get something good. And still others might feel unclear about what their instructor actually wants. And they may resort to copying from the internet or a classmate's work because that's the easiest thing to do.
And disorganization can also lead to plagiarism. Juggling notes from multiple sources without proper attribution increases the risk of accidental plagiarism. Even procrastination, leaving everything to the last minute, often results in shortcuts that compromise academic integrity. Do you have some strategies, Amy, that we can employ to help us avoid plagiarism?
Definitely. To avoid plagiarism, we start by organizing our research process. We gather our materials and get them all organized. And we can use folders to do this. We can print our sources. We can create a reference page right away so that we know what we have. And then we have to take good notes as we sift through all of these sources. This is where things can get disorganized and a little jumbled up. But we want to document what we plan to use, and always keep track of where it came from. If we create our resource page first, we can easily number or color code the source and then number or color code our notes to match so that we know what to cite when it's time to write.
Then from our notes, we need to outline and write. We can avoid that mosaic plagiarism by summarizing our ideas in our own words before we reference our notes. And because we took good notes, we can then give credit where credit is due. Proper citation is non-negotiable.
And last, we have to revise. At this step, we double check that everything aligns with our voice and that all of our sources are properly cited.
This sounds like a lot of work, Amy, and I'm guessing some of our guests are thinking the same thing. Will it always be as hard as it sounds right now?
This is definitely a case of practice makes easier. With practice, it's a process that becomes second nature. It's not nearly as hard as it seems. I promise it gets easier every time that you do it.
Oh, that is great to hear. Do you have any other ways we can protect ourselves against plagiarism?
I have 3 other tips, in fact. First, start by talking to your instructor. If you're unsure about reusing work or citing a particular source, you found something on the internet, kind of like we talked about earlier, and you're not sure if it's a good one and if you're allowed to use it, you just want to ask. If you need clarification on the assignment or the rubric, you can ask your instructor. Secondly, you can seek help from a tutor or a librarian for guidance during the research and writing process. They are there for support. Our tutors at Tutor.com can help you with any of the writing process, even if it's just here's the instructions and the rubric and I don't know where to start. And lastly, something we discussed a moment ago, you can write your reference list first. This is a simple step that you can take to keep your citations organized from the start. And anything you end up not using because you didn't get to it or you didn't actually need it, you just delete.
Those are great tips, Amy. Thank you. I imagine another common thought right now is wondering whether everything we think actually comes from somewhere else. Is anything that we think even original?
That's a great question. Here are some things you can do to know that you can trust yourself. First, write your thesis and topic sentences from memory, not directly from an article that you just read. Then use your research as evidence to back up your thoughts, not as a substitute for your thoughts. And lastly, you want to synthesize information from multiple sources to create unique insights. And multiple sources is really important because if you just read one source, that's just one perspective. But the more sources you can cite and read, the more varied and nuanced your responses are going to become, and your research gets stronger.
So what you're saying is that all research papers come from research. They're about engaging with existing knowledge, not inventing ideas from scratch. So unless we're talking about creative writing or poetry, we aren't actually looking to make something up out of thin air.
Precisely. So we've talked a lot. Let's go back to Ravi. Ravi's case study from the beginning of our presentation, it was about, is it plagiarism to submit the same paper for 2 different assignments?
I would say yes, this falls under our definition of self-plagiarism. Ravi should have asked his instructor for permission before reusing previous work.
That's right. That's exactly right. Whoops. By asking first, he can make the right choice and ensure that he is acting with academic integrity.
What about Melanie? Was citing internet sufficient, or has she also plagiarized?
Melanie has also plagiarized. Citing internet is not sufficient. It's also an example of sloppy work because proper citations are essential. Melanie should verify her sources and cite them correctly. If the information she's found can't be verified, then she shouldn't use it.
Because discussion boards and personal websites aren't always reliable, it's always better to trace the original research. A librarian is a great resource for help getting you from the jumping off point of an informal discussion board to a concrete source that corroborates it if you're having difficulty finding original sources of your own. When I was in school and writing research papers, I often wondered when I should paraphrase something and when I should quote it. Can you give us some help, Amy, with making that distinction?
I sure can. You want to paraphrase most of the time. It integrates smoothly into your writing and it shows critical thinking, where quotes can just make a paper sound a little choppy and send the message that you haven't actually developed any of your own ideas about the topic. Again, that's a copy paste kind of thing. You want to quote only when the author's words are profound or uniquely impactful, or when you're taking a very unique position that relies on the reader understanding exactly what another writer already said about it. Just be sure to use proper transitions and context so the quotes flow. We'll show you how to do that in a minute. An example of a quote that you would not want to paraphrase is this one by Maya Angelou. Of course, there's no point in paraphrasing that.
That's a great distinction. Thank you. You mentioned transitions when we use quotes. Can you tell us more about how to do that effectively and what a proper transition looks like?
Certainly can. Using transition words like as stated by or in the words of helps quotes flow seamlessly into your writing. Other examples include words like this: likewise, additionally, for example, to illustrate. And just a little tip, I used to have all these words written out on a little sticky note and I kept it on my computer screen so that I could just grab one that fit perfectly because I could never remember them all. So just an idea. For example, let's give an example here. Here's a quote with a transition word. Notice how it maintains the flow of the argument. It says, to illustrate the fact that heart disease is a serious killer, the CDC says, now we go into the quote, one person dies every 33 seconds in the United States from cardiovascular disease. And then there's your parenthetical documentation.
Okay, I see. It's like we need to introduce the quote before we share it. That should keep it from feeling out of place or making our paper sound choppy. I noticed it also has a citation, like you mentioned, so that we know where it came from. What else can you tell us about citations?
Every citation includes two parts, the in-text citation and the reference list entry. So here we see that heart disease quote again from our research paper. And that's where we have that parenthetical in-text citation. Below, now here's the matching reference list entry. Both are using APA style in this example. So if you're not using APA style in your class, it might not look quite right because it's going to be a different format, but there you have it. You can see that the parenthetical documentation matches up with what's going to go on that reference page below.
Awesome. So one last question I imagine people might still be wrangling with. After all of this, why should plagiarism matter to us?
Good one. Most schools have zero tolerance plagiarism policies. And while they may suspect that you might not have done it on purpose, it's really hard to prove if it was an accident.
How are cases of academic plagiarism even handled?
Most cases of academic plagiarism are handled by the school disciplinary board, and consequences could include failing grades or academic probation, suspension, or even expulsion. A record of plagiarism can even lead to difficulty in gaining admission to another college or university when you want to go in the future.
Wow, that's a pretty big deal. But that's just in school, right? Is plagiarism a thing to the professional world?
It sure is. Plagiarism in your professional life, such as works published on a company website or in newspapers or in a professional journal, or even in your personal life, like if you write a blog, can have legal consequences. Plagiarism is a misdemeanor and it's punishable with fines of up to $50,000 or even jail time.
So plagiarism can have academic, legal, and financial consequences. Is there anything else we should consider about it?
Well, more realistically, if you don't learn the material that you're supposed to learn in class, you could have a hard time getting a job. Many companies ask interview questions that can easily illuminate your lack of knowledge. Finding a position in a new industry or your first job out of college is hard enough. So you want to set yourself up for success. You want to know as much as you can possibly know. All that learning, you want that to be in your back pocket for that interview.
You may also find it difficult to keep a job where you're expected to jump into the deep end. Your education is preparing you for this, so you don't want to take any shortcuts like copying someone else's work or using ChatGPT's work as your own and missing out on the learning that you're supposed to be doing right now.
That's right. Remember that integrity isn't just about avoiding plagiarism or trying not to get in trouble or get caught. It's about striving for excellence in all that you do. So that's a good place to end this. We want to thank you all for joining us on our look at the intersection between AI and academic integrity and why we should care. We hope this is helpful to you in your academic journey and beyond. Again, here's what's coming up next. Overcoming test anxiety is the next one. Here's the references that we used because we did not plagiarize. And here's where you can follow us on social media or check out some of our other webinars. And so for questions, I'm going to pass it back over to Maxine.
Awesome. Yeah, thank you so much for this presentation. We did get a couple of questions, and just to kind of reiterate, I do want to make sure that you all follow us on our social medias. That way you get access to any of our other upcoming webinars. You can also take a view at all of our previous webinars over on our YouTube channel. The URL is listed there. And we also do have a brand new webinar hub. If you go to tutor.com/webinars, you'll be able to see all of our previous webinars across all the different topics we cover, as well as any of our upcoming ones. So you can easily register on that page there. Again, if there are any questions, feel free to drop those into the question box. We did have a couple of people ask a number of questions. One, if this was being recorded, it will be recorded and it will be shared with you in the coming days. In that follow-up email, you'll also get a PowerPoint PDF of all the slides, so you'll have access to all of those references and resources that we've talked about here today, as well as anything else that we've gone over. We did get another question a couple of times about an e-certificate. Right now, we aren't providing e-certificates for these webinars. If you do need some kind of proof that you have attended this webinar, that follow-up email will confirm that you did join the webinar presentation, and you can use that. Otherwise, I think we can kind of hop into some of the questions. Amy and Sarah, there were a couple that came in asking about how to check against plagiarism, either as a student to make sure you're not accidentally plagiarizing and that you're kind of on the right path, or as a teacher. Do you have any tools or tips for people in those situations?
I think that one's yours, Amy.
Okay. Yeah, we had some tools that were shared with us the last time we did this webinar, and I researched those. It looks like they're just changing and growing so much that I didn't go too deep into them. Some of them are paid resources, and I didn't have a need for those, but I do know that there are tools out there. So if you're an instructor looking for that, that's probably something best to talk with your institution about what they would recommend you use. It's like I said, constantly changing. Google, try things. You can, a lot of them you can try out for free and see how they work. And then as far as a student checking to make sure you're on the right track, I think we did get asked this before, Sarah, and help me remember how we answered. But I know one of the ways that you can check that you're using or that you're not plagiarizing is to use Google. You can certainly take what you've written and paste it into Google, and Google will quickly tell you if that's something that is word for word from another source. That's one thing you can do. I'm trying to think of any other ideas, Sarah. What else did we come up with the last time?
Yeah, I think that's the best one is even if it's not word for word matching what you wrote, if it's really close, it's going to show up in those Google results and you'll be, oh, okay, which
Mm-hmm.
actually can be a good way to figure out where your notes came from if you
That's
didn't
true.
have good organization in the first place. But I strongly recommend a color-coded or numbered resource list to start with before you even do your notes. Just makes
Mm-hmm.
life easier.
All right, perfect. And then the other question was when you were showing off quotes and it had kind of in-text citations, do you need to provide
Yes.
in-text citations when paraphrasing, or do you just list those in like the bibliography that you might be including?
That's great. Anytime anything comes from a source, you have to cite it. So even if you're paraphrasing it from that source. So you have to cite it. Time when you're not going to be paraphrasing or quoting was when we recommended that you write your topic sentences and your thesis from memory. That means that you're going to then be writing it in your completely your own thoughts. It's not to say that you didn't, you know, kind of decide on your argument based on some of the things you read, but the argument becomes yours. So that's okay if you don't cite that. But if it's a paraphrase from a book or an article, you're still getting that information from something else. You didn't make it up. So you still have to cite it.
Awesome. It doesn't look like we have any other questions coming in. There was just one more asking if they could share this webinar and the recording with their students. So you are more than welcome to do so, and we actually highly
Yes,
encourage
please.
that. So please do once you get that recording, or if you go to our YouTube channel, you can easily share from there as well. But since it doesn't look like any other questions are coming in, I think we can go ahead and end it. So thank you so much, Amy and Sarah, for this great presentation.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye,
All right,
everyone.
bye.